Now, proposed new laws regulating the rights of employees to request remote working are fundamentally flawed and stacked in favour of the employer. That's the view of the Financial Services Union. Its General Secretary, John O'Connell, is on the line. Why do you believe they are stacked in favour of the employer?
Good morning, Shane. Well, the proposals that were outlined by government in the Heads Bill signal 13 reasons for refusal by an employer. And firstly, we think that's way too extensive. Secondly, we have had the experience of the pandemic and working from home. And it's been a very positive experience both for employers and employees. And what this piece of legislation is doing is enshrining in legislation the right to request remote working, which we think is very reasonable. It's in line with at least 12 other EU member states who have this right in legislation, and countries like New Zealand and UK have a statutory right to request since 2014.
Okay, I'm just reading the employers group. They have their own reservations about what's being proposed. I mean, they're talking about the examples like they're saying a small cafe, for example, would be required to have a remote working policy, despite the fact that remote working could never be offered. Like, I'm thinking of my own position. I mean, could I demand to be allowed work and broadcast from home if the odds were stacked more in favour of the employee?
If your role suited remote working, there's no reason why you can't request, but it's still down to the employer to have a reason to say, well, Shane, that won't work for us, and here's the reasons why. And then, like everything else in life, you have the right to have that appealed if you think that that's an unfair decision. And that's what we're looking for in the legislation, that if your employer outlines reasons to refuse your request, that you have the right, first of all, to have a debate with your employer around that, have representation as a member of a trade union, have your case heard, and the specific circumstances that you operate in. And then if, again, the employer feels that they aren't in a position to concede, you have the right to have that heard by an independent third party at WRC to adjudicate on
it all sounds, and I get where you're coming from, but it all sounds quite long drawn out, quite cumbersome, an awful lot of red tape. I mean, is it not better to have a scenario that, like, employers and employees just agree this thing? And if you have employers that aren't, particularly open to this, it's a seller's market at the moment, and that employees just go elsewhere to employers who are more open and more flexible.
And I think some people can do that, but I think it's more important that people's rights are enshrined in law. And this is a right to request. That's as far as it goes, and it has a process then inbuilt into it. And for lots of people, and lots of employers and lots of workers, it'll be just as a backdrop, because employers will be reasonable about that, and employees requesting will be reasonable. And the examples you gave would be, examples of where it would present a huge challenge, and an employer might have a reasonable ground to refuse. But it's in the circumstances where people are requiring it for commute reasons, for work-life balance reasons, and employer is just taking a stand and saying, I don't want to grant anyone a request.
All right, we will leave it there. General Secretary of the Financial Services Union, John O'Connell, thank you indeed for talking to NewsTalk Breakfast this morning.